Imagine the monumental Hoover Dam, holding back millions of tons of water. Imagine the endless canvas of the Panama Canal, the trenches of World War I that redrew the map of Europe, and the giant, multi-kilometer quarries where copper, cobalt, and lithium for your smartphone and electric vehicle batteries are mined around the clock today. What unites all these titanic, planet-altering projects? Paradoxically, all this infrastructure, all this industrial scale became possible only because at the end of the 19th century, Californian farmers were driven to a nervous tic by one purely mundane, down-to-earth problem. Their incredibly expensive, innovative machines constantly sank in the mud. Today, we will dissect the history of the Caterpillar Company. And believe me, this is not just a story about how some smart guy thought to attach tracks to a tractor instead of wheels. This is an epic corporate thriller 120 years in the making. This is a story about the fierce hatred of two families, about multi-million-dollar patent wars, about brilliant marketing, about a severe confrontation with Asian corporations, and about how an attempt to not get stuck in a peat bog spawned an industrial empire with a revenue of almost $70 billion a year. It is the end of the 19th century. We are in the Central Valley of California. If you look at a map, you will see a huge depression between the Sierra Nevada mountains and the coastal ranges. This is one of the most fertile places on planet Earth. The soil here is delta peat and loam. It is so rich in minerals and organics that it seems if you stick a shovel handle into it, it will blossom by spring. Wheat and barley were mass-grown here, and endless orchards were planted. The problem was not the quality of the land, but its physics. This soil was as soft as a water-soaked sponge. By the 1880s, farming in California had acquired a truly industrial scale. It was physically impossible to cultivate thousands of acres by hand, so the advanced technology of the time, steam tractors, was brought into the fields. Just picture this scene. Giant steel leviathans spewing black smoke, weighing 40,000 to 50,000 pounds, that's over 20 tons. They were supposed to pull huge reapers and plows. And so this steel monster rolls off the solid road onto a Californian field. What happens next? Pure physics. The giant weight of the machine, concentrated on the narrow points of contact of the steel wheels with the ground, simply cuts through the soft peat like a hot knife cuts butter. The machine sinks to its belly after a couple of 100 meters. The boiler boils. The workers curse. Use horses? Yes, the farmers tried. To pull one giant combine harvester required a team of 30 to 40 animals. Just think about the logistics of this process. 40 horses need to be fed, watered, they need to be managed, and worst of all, they also got stuck in this delta soil, broke their legs, and died of exhaustion. Engineers of the late 19th century tried to solve the problem of heavy tractors as bluntly and straightforwardly as possible. If the machine sinks, it means the ground pressure must be reduced. How to do this? Increase the contact area. That is, make the wheels wider. And they started making them wider. First, the width of the steel wheel was 4 feet, then 6 feet. The tractors continued to sink. Engineers made wheels 10 feet wide. Eventually, absolutely insane, cyclopean machines appeared, which had steel drums attached to the sides, 18 feet wide each. The total width of such a tractor reached 46 feet, about 14 meters. For this thing to just enter the field, farmers had to tear down gates and fences. But you cannot fool nature. The wider you make the steel wheel and its spokes, the heavier the structure becomes. The heavier the structure, the deeper it ultimately sinks into the ground. It was a vicious circle of engineering impotence. It is in this soggy, muddy, and incredibly profitable valley that the main characters of our story step onto the stage. And no, this is not a pair of noble idealist scientists. These are two incredibly stubborn, tough, and pragmatic businessmen who could not stand the sight of each other. Chapter 2. Two Capitalists and One Problem. Meet the Holt family. Charles Henry Holt ran a sawmill business in New Hampshire, on the opposite side of the country. He had 12 children, and all of them worked hard in the family business from a young age. In 1883, one of the younger brothers, Benjamin Holt, moves west to Stockton, California, where, along with his brothers, he founds a company producing wooden wheels for wagons and agricultural machinery. Benjamin Holt was not an academic scientist with diplomas from prestigious universities. He was a tough practitioner. He understood the economics of physical labor, hated meaningless effort, and knew how to work with metal and wood. The production of wheels brought in money. The company invested $65,000, a colossal sum for those times, in equipment. But Benjamin understood. The real money was not in components. It lay in the machines themselves. In 1892, he founds the Holt Manufacturing Company and begins building his own steam tractors, those same giant 24-foot behemoths. He sells them to farmers. Farmers pay exorbitant money, go out into the fields, and the machines sink in the delta mud of the San Joaquin River. Holt arrives at the calls, looks at his drowned masterpieces of engineering thought, and loses millions of nerve cells. But Holt was not the only player in this field. There was also Daniel Best, and later his son Clarence Leo Best, known as C.L. Best. Daniel Best had come west back in the 1850s and had spent decades building his own steam tractors and combines. The Bests were the elite of Californian mechanical engineering, and their tractors, surprise, helplessly sank in the swamps in exactly the same way. By 1903, Benjamin Holt, tired of draining budgets on designing increasingly wider and useless steel wheels, decides to take a different path. He heads to Europe. He had heard that engineers in England were patenting experimental endless tracks, caterpillars. Holt studies these patents, looks at the blueprints, and realizes one sad thing. The British concepts were great on paper, within the walls of clean offices, but in real life, when rocks, mud, and branches got inside the mechanisms, this delicate English engineering simply fell apart. Holt returns to Stockton in a terrible mood, but with a clear understanding. He will have to do everything himself, and in such a way that it works in the most hellish conditions. Chapter 3. Thanksgiving Day, 1904. On November 24, 1904, on Thanksgiving Day, while normal Americans were eating turkey, mechanics in Holt's workshop were making history. They drove an old, reliable 40-horsepower steam tractor, listed as number 77, into the shop. The mechanics completely dismantled the rear drive wheels. Instead, Holt ordered the installation of a structure that classic engineers of the time would probably have laughed at. It was a pair of continuous tracks, 9 feet long and only 2 feet wide, and they were not made of high-alloy steel. The tracks, links, were ordinary wooden planks measuring 3 by 4 inches, bolted to endless metal chains. The weight of the giant steam boiler rested on road wheels that rolled along the inside of this chain. In very simple terms, Holt forced his heavy machine to do the following. It laid a piece of wooden road in front of itself, drove over it, then picked up this piece from behind, threw it forward, and drove over it again. And so ad infinitum. The contact area increased manifold, and the weight was distributed so evenly that the pressure per square inch of ground became less than that of a walking human's foot. The tractor was rolled out for testing onto the wettest, peatiest field near the Mormon Slough. Holt held his breath. The mechanic applied steam. Tractor number 77 did not just move. It didn't sink. Moreover, it pulled 4 double-bottom plows behind it, plowing the land 2 inches deeper than a much more powerful 60-horsepower wheeled tractor could do, which bogged down and slipped on every meter. Watching this triumph was the company's staff photographer, Charles Clements. He looked at how the wooden ribbon moved in a wave-like manner, rolling over the sprockets, and uttered a phrase that was worth billions of dollars. "It crawls like a caterpillar." Holt not only liked the name, he understood its marketing potential. A caterpillar is a symbol of something slow, inevitable, and all-terrain. In 1910, he officially registers the trademark Caterpillar. It would seem, here it is, triumph. Patent it, sell it, and enjoy the status of a monopolist. But, as we know, in the world of big money, the emergence of a breakthrough innovation is always a signal to start a war of annihilation. Chapter 4: Bloody Patents and the War for Farmers. While Benjamin Holt was converting his tracked tractors from heavy, archaic steam to more modern gasoline engines, which made it possible to abandon tons of water and coal, his main competitor was not sitting idly by either. In 1908, old man Daniel Best sells his business to the Holts. It would seem the competitor is eliminated. But his son, Clarence Leo Best, slams the door. In 1910, he founds his own company, the C.L. Best Tractor Company, and begins producing gasoline-tracked tractors. And here begins a classic strategy of business differentiation. Holt, intoxicated by scale, produced giant, incredibly expensive machines. The first tractor cost $5,500, which in modern money is over $180,000. These monsters were suitable only for large latifundistas. Best, on the other hand, was more cunning. He looked at the market and realized that a huge number of average farmers did not need a machine the size of a house. Best begins to produce more compact, lighter, maneuverable, and, most importantly, cheaper tracked tractors. He hit Holt in his most vulnerable spot, the mass market. A patent slaughter began. It was a real war of attrition. Holt's and Best's lawyers literally lived in the courts. They sued over the shape of the tracks, the placement of the rollers, over trademarks, over every nut that even remotely resembled a competitor's. Just think about this figure. The two companies spent over $1,500,000 combined on litigation. For the 1910s, this was astronomical money. Financial resources that could have gone to salaries for the best engineers, to improving metallurgy and building new workshops, were meaninglessly burned in courts just to prove who was the first to invent the correct inclination of a gear. And perhaps they would have sued each other into complete bankruptcy had Archduke Franz Ferdinand not been assassinated in Sarajevo in 1914. Chapter 5: Tanks, Artillery, and Military Contracts. The First World War began, and suddenly it turned out that Europe, in its landscape characteristics, very much resembled the Californian swamps. The autumn slush turned the fields of Flanders and France into an endless sea of sticky, impassable mud, cratered by millions of shell holes. The British and French armies somehow needed to drag heavy artillery guns and supply wagons. Wheeled trucks sank instantly. Horses went mad and died by the thousands under fire, unable to pull the cannons out of the quagmire. And then the British quartermasters turned their attention to strange agricultural machines from America that moved on endless belts. His Majesty's government orders a batch of Holt's machines. The tracked tractors performed simply brilliantly. By 1916, 1,000 Holt tractors were already serving in the British Army, and by the end of the war, the Allies were using more than 10,000 machines. 120 horsepower monsters weighing 18,000 pounds each crawled through barbed wire and gas attacks, pulling howitzers to the front line. It was the sight of a Holt tractor confidently crawling over trenches that prompted British military engineers to think about creating an armored combat vehicle on a caterpillar track, what we call a tank today. Holt bathed in glory and government contracts. The factories worked in 3 shifts, stamping out military tugs. The name Holt became world famous. But working on the government needle always has the severest withdrawal syndrome. In 1918, the war ends. Military orders are cut off in a single day. The government terminates contracts. Holt's factories are clogged with huge, gluttonous military tractors that farmers don't need for free. Moreover, the army begins selling off surplus equipment on the cheap, driving down market prices. And what was Clarence Leo Best doing during this time? While Holt was saving democracy in Europe, Best methodically, factory by factory, farm by farm, was capturing the US civilian market. He built a powerful dealer network, created compact models, and now American farmers were buying Best's tractors, considering Holt's machinery a relic of the military era. In 1920, never recovering from the post-war crisis, 71-year-old Benjamin Holt dies. His company finds itself on the brink of a financial abyss. Debts are growing. The domestic market is lost to the worst competitor. But, ironically, not everything was smooth sailing for Best either. He had excellent tractors and farmers, but lacked the giant production capacity and the global name that Holt had earned. Both companies were burdened with debts to the same Californian banks due to years of patent wars. And then, in the offices of financiers on Wall Street and in San Francisco, the only correct capitalist decision was made. Chapter 6. Merger of Enemies and the Creation of a Dealer Empire. The bankers sit down at the negotiating table and deliver a tough ultimatum. Either you continue to tear each other's throats out and we bankrupt you, or you merge. In April 1925, a historic merger took place. The Holt Manufacturing Company and the C.L. Best Tractor Company were merged into a new corporation, the Caterpillar Tractor Company. But do you know what the most striking thing about this deal is? The head of the merged company, its president and CEO, was not Holt's heir. It was Clarence Leo Best, the man Benjamin Holt had sued all his life. The victor in the format war took over the empire of the defeated. Best would manage Caterpillar for 26 years, up until 1951. First of all, Best carried out ruthless optimization. Out of dozens of different models, he left only the 5 most successful ones on the assembly line, 3 from Holt and 2 from his old company. But the main thing Best did was merge the formerly competing dealers of Holt and Best into a single, monolithic sales network. And at this point, we must make a semantic pause. Usually, when people talk about the secret of the success of industrial giants, they think about the thickness of the armor, the power of the cylinders, or clever alloys. This is all nonsense. Caterpillar's real secret, their absolute monopoly moat, which no one has been able to overcome to this day, is their dealer infrastructure. Just think about it. You can produce the best, most reliable bulldozer in the world. But if it breaks down in a quarry in the Australian outback, in the Amazon jungle, or at a dam construction site in Africa, your perfect bulldozer will turn into a useless pile of iron, generating millions in losses due to downtime. Best built a system in which Caterpillar dealers were not just franchise sellers. They were independent, often family businesses that invested their own millions of dollars into parts warehouses, repair hangars, and mechanic training in their regions. If a tractor broke down on the other side of the world, a part was not ordered by mail from Illinois. A local guy in a pickup truck would come to you from a warehouse 50 kilometers away and repair the equipment right in the field. This system guaranteed customers confidence. When buying a Caterpillar tractor, you weren't buying a piece of iron, you were buying a guarantee that the work would not stop. By 1929, the merged company's sales had tripled. Shareholders drank champagne. But the joy was short-lived. On October 24, 1929, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression began. Chapter 7. The Great Depression, Diesel, and the Color Yellow. The economic shock was catastrophic. Sales of heavy machinery collapsed into nothingness. If Caterpillar earned $45 million in 1930, in 1932 it was a paltry $13 million. For the first time, the company showed a loss for the year. Factories stopped. Workers were transferred to a 4-day week. Construction in the U.S. practically froze. Competitors filed for bankruptcy en masse. What does a typical hired top manager do in such a situation? Cuts research and development, R&D, expenses, fires engineers, and tries to wait out the crisis. What does Clarence Leo Best do? He pours enormous funds for those times into the development of a completely new technology, risking the company's last money. He bets on the diesel engine. Rudolf Diesel patented his motor back in 1893. But until the 1930s, diesels were gigantic, heavy units the size of a small room, which were put on ships or factories. Attempts to cram a diesel into mobile equipment encountered problems of vibration, weight, and reliability. The tractor market completely ran on gasoline. But gasoline was expensive, and heavy tractors devoured an incredible amount of it. Best tasks engineer Art Rosen with creating a compact diesel, and in 1930, the D9900 prototype appears, affectionately nicknamed Old Betsy within the company. In very simple terms, a diesel engine did not need spark plugs. The fuel ignited from wild pressure in the cylinders. Old Betsy produced 86 horsepower at a tiny 700 revolutions per minute. This meant that the engine had colossal torque at the low end, exactly what a bulldozer needs to move 10 tons of soil, while consuming half as much fuel as its gasoline counterpart. In 1931, the first diesel Caterpillar rolled off the assembly line. The savings for builders were so obvious that, despite the crisis, the machines started flying off the shelves. In that same 1931, the company makes another decision that forever inscribed it into pop culture. Previously, all tractors were painted a dull gray with red trim. But construction sites were becoming larger, work on them proceeded day and night, and gray machines were simply invisible in the dust. People fell under the tracks. Caterpillar decides to paint absolutely all its equipment in a piercingly bright yellow color, highway yellow, with black trim. This was done for safety, but ultimately the yellow bulldozer became a global icon of industrialization. It wasn't just the diesel that saved the company in the 1930s. Ironically, the American capitalist giant was pulled up by orders from the communist Soviet Union. In the early 30s, the USSR was carrying out forced industrialization. They needed thousands of machines to build factories in the Urals and mine coal. Soviet orders loaded up the factories in Illinois, providing an influx of cash. Back home, Caterpillar was pulled out by two megaprojects: the construction of the Cyclopean Hoover Dam and the erection of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. Yellow diesel monsters moved the earth in both places. And then World War II broke out. Chapter 8: Military Bulldozers and the Post-War Boom. When the U.S. entered the war in 1941, the government immediately got its hands on Caterpillar's factories. Only this time, they didn't need artillery tractors, but specifically construction equipment. The tactics of the Allies in the Pacific against Japan were based on the principle of island hopping. Naval construction battalions, Seabees, had to land on a jungle-covered island and in a couple of days turn it into a working airfield for bombers. The workhorse of this war became the Caterpillar D7 model. Equipped with a blade, this bulldozer uprooted palm trees, filled craters, pushed knocked-out tanks into ditches, and built airstrips in record time. In Europe, engineer corps used the D7 to clear the ruins of bombed German and French cities, paving the way for advancing tanks. General Raybould said then, Victory leans toward those who are better at moving earth. By 1945, 85% of Caterpillar's entire production was going to the needs of the Army. Over 20,000 bulldozers were produced, and when the war ended, a golden age began. The whole world lay in ruins. Europe was being rebuilt under the Marshall Plan. America began the construction of the Great Interstate Highway System, the largest infrastructure project in history. The demand for earth-moving equipment was colossal. Shutting down engines on the beaches of Okinawa, the bulldozers returned home and began to build a peaceful life. In the 1950s and 60s, Caterpillar began an aggressive global expansion. Factories opened in England, Brazil, Australia, and Japan. The assortment expanded. Wheel loaders, huge mining dump trucks, and pipe layers for the oil and gas sector appeared. The dealer network enveloped the planet like a mycelium. By the mid-1960s, the company's revenue exceeded $2 billion. Top managers at the headquarters in Peoria, Illinois, relaxed. They were the absolute, unattainable kings of the mountain. It seemed to them that it would always be this way. And for this arrogance, they almost paid with their lives in the 1980s. Chapter 9. The Japanese Threat and Corporate Transformation. In the late 1960s, a new player appeared on the world stage, the Japanese company Komatsu. Initially, it was a small equipment manufacturer that grew on the post-war reconstruction of Japan. But Komatsu's management set a goal that sounded like a mantra: Maru-si, surround Caterpillar. The Japanese began methodically, pedantically copying and improving American equipment. Thanks to the strictest quality control and cheaper labor, Komatsu entered the international market with machinery that was virtually equal to Caterpillar in reliability. But cost: 40% less. For the Americans, this was a shock. By the early 80s, Komatsu became so brazen that it opened a factory in Tennessee, right in the U.S. domestic market. Moreover, through joint ventures, they began intercepting major contracts. The situation for Caterpillar was complicated by a perfect macroeconomic storm. The global economy entered a recession. The demand for resources fell. The U.S. imposed an embargo against the USSR over Afghanistan, which in a single day froze $400 million in orders for Caterpillar pipe layers. Machines gathered dust in warehouses. Market share melted rapidly. The company, which was a symbol of American power, in the mid-80s was losing almost $1 million every single day. On top of everything, internal rebellions began. The United Auto Workers (UAW) union did not want to make concessions or accept wage cuts. Exhausting, brutal strikes began. In 1982, workers struck for 205 consecutive days. Factories stood still. The Japanese were shipping equipment to Caterpillar customers at this time. It is at this critical moment, when the smell of corporate death was already distinct, that George Schaefer takes the CEO chair. And he carries out the most painful, yet saving operation in the company's history. He launches the Plant with a Future program, worth $1.8 billion. To help you understand the scale of the problem, before this reform, production at Caterpillar factories resembled Brownian motion. French top manager Pierre Guérindon described the production lines as a bowl of spaghetti. A part could travel from one end of a giant workshop to the other and back dozens of times. The assembly of one loader took 3 weeks. The program razed the old processes to the ground. Japanese principles of lean manufacturing were introduced. Ironically, they learned from the enemy. Factories were robotized. As a result, the assembly of a loader was reduced from 3 weeks to 2 to 3 days. Costs plummeted. Schaefer's second decision was even more radical. In 1990, with a single stroke of his pen, he destroyed the all-powerful central bureaucracy. Previously, all decisions were made in huge headquarters departments divorced from reality. Schaefer divided the company into autonomous business units, engines, mining equipment, hydraulics, etc., each of which was itself responsible for its own profits and losses. Corporate fat was trimmed. Caterpillar became lean, mean, and highly efficient. The Japanese offensive was halted and thrown back. By the early 90s, the company not only recouped its losses, it began to generate super profits. And do you know who helped them survive in these dark years? Those same dealers. While Komatsu equipment was 40% cheaper, many customers still overpaid for the yellow machines, because they knew a Caterpillar dealer in the neighboring city always has spare parts in stock. But where to look for a part for a Japanese bulldozer in case of a breakdown was unclear. The dealer moat worked. Chapter 10: The Era of Megatechnologies and the Wheel of Samsara. Having survived the Japanese threat, in the 90s and 2000s Caterpillar turned into a technological monster. In 1986, they even officially renamed themselves from Caterpillar Tractor Company to Caterpillar Incorporated, because they no longer just made tractors. They bought up engine manufacturers, for example, the British Perkins. They entered the power generation sector, and in 2011, they made the purchase of the century. For $8.6 billion, they absorbed Bucyrus International, the world leader in the production of giant walking excavators and underground mining systems. Now, if you wanted to open a coal or gold mine, you didn't need to look for 10 suppliers. You simply called a Cat dealer and bought everything turnkey. Today, Caterpillar equipment is not just chunks of iron with a diesel. A modern Cat mining dump truck is a robot the size of a 3-story house. They work in Australian and Chilean quarries absolutely autonomously. There is no human in the cab. The truck drives via GPS, scanning space with LiDARs and radars, avoiding obstacles with millimeter precision, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without lunch breaks, union strikes, and fatigue. All this equipment is connected by the cloud system Cat Connect, which transmits telemetry. A mechanic thousands of kilometers away knows that an oil pump on a dump truck will wear out in 2 weeks and orders the part in advance. The company has paid steady dividends for decades. Its revenue hovers around $67 billion, and it employs over 115,000 people on all continents. If we look back over these 120 years, we see a striking, almost philosophical picture. The wheel of samsara has made a full turn. At the end of the 19th century, 2 stubborn Californians who hated each other spent millions of dollars in courts just to stop a bulky iron box from sinking into the soggy peat. They bolted pieces of wood to chains on Thanksgiving Day, trying to save the harvest. It took 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the invention of the diesel, the creation of a global network of family dealers, severe labor riots, and the threat of destruction by Asian competitors, for these wooden planks to grow into the architecture on which the physical world rests today. All these skyscrapers, highways, tunnels, mines, and ports exist only because capital knows how to unite in the face of death, and engineers know how to properly distribute mass. Every time you see a yellow machine with a triangular logo, just remember, it is not just a tractor. It is 100 years of mistakes, billions of dollars, and the simple, absolutely perfected human desire to move the earth exactly as needed.